Welcome, 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 Stevens community. Welcome to Think, Speak, Do, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar series. This is webinar 9 of 9, and today is August 19th, 2020. So welcome, thank you for creating and prioritizing time to be with us on this virtual platform. I am Shaashawn. I serve as the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with Stevens College, and I am a proud alumna. I'm very excited to welcome all of our Stevens constituents that comprise our community. So welcome to all of our undergraduate residential students. We have some on campus now, our student athletes and our student resident life staff. So welcome, welcome. This weekend is new move-in for new students. So we'll have many more of our undergraduate members back. So welcome to our graduate students. Welcome to our fully online students. Welcome to faculty, welcome back. Welcome to staff who've been doing amazing work all spring and summer. Welcome to alums, alumni. Welcome to members of our board of trustees who've been joining us all series long. And of course, members of our Columbia, Missouri community and Pennsylvania community, because our guest speaker currently resides in Pennsylvania. So speaking of our guest speaker, I want you all to warmly welcome Dre Ceja. Dre goes by they, them, L pronouns. Dre is a unapologetic Chicano, queer, transgender, and non-binary speaker, facilitator, consultant, and trainer. They studied sociology and gender at California University of Pennsylvania and focused their honors research around social inequities. Dre currently works as a director of training and education at the LGBT Center of Central Pennsylvania and continuing education instructor at Temple University, Harrisburg campus, and a moderator at Transgender Training Institute. Very busy individual. Dre is passionate about intersectional social justice and brings these concepts to practice in their work. So please welcome an amazing human being, Dre Ceja. Welcome, Dre. So excited. And I am doubly excited to welcome you and present you to the Stevens community because many members have learned about you before seeing you. Because Stevens, if you will remember, fall 2019 was my first term, and I flew back home to Pennsylvania to be honored by the LGBT Center with a Fab Legacy Award, so their annual event. And while there, the theme of the annual event fundraiser was Stonewall 50. And on each of the tables were these amazing wood carvings that were highlighting different moments, people, places, quotations, data from Stonewall. And the creator of those wood burnings is Dre Ceja. So I told many of you about Dre, but now you get to put a face with the amazing skill set and lived experience. So Dre created the wood burning. So this was the one picture that framed all of that. And then if you remember in my old office in LRW, I had them displayed because it was the largest surface where I could display these items. And so they are now in the new office and hopefully they will go to a renamed space in the library so that they will be displayed for everyone all campus, and I just won't have the honor of getting to see them daily. So I just wanted to kind of bring that back to consciousness for many of our Stevens community that Dre is the creator of the wood burnings. So snaps, claps, appreciation for that. So Dre, how are you in this moment?
Doing pretty good. There's a lot going on this summer, and we all know how hectic and busy the world is right now. Lots and lots of emotions. Definitely want to acknowledge all of that. It's all happening at the same time as this training, right? This isn't going to happen in a vacuum. So hold space for yourself too, and I'll also come here as a human being who's going through all of it as well. So everybody who's on this call, it's real. It's a real summer. Let's just stick together through this hour we have together, this time that we have together.
Absolutely. Thank you. So just a reminder, Stevens community, that I am not an office of one. I get the pleasure of working and connecting and building with some amazing human beings. So Shannon Walls, another Stevens alum, who serves as the special assistant to the president and our Title IX coordinator, and Sadie Mayerstrand, who serves as our director of the Student Success Center and our ADA Section 504 coordinator. And so something new is that we've got shorter web pages, thanks to the fabulous Ellen Orner. So you've got stevens.edu/DEI, stevens.edu Title IX, stevens.edu ADA. And you can always get to us at equity@stevens.edu. So remember, each one of us has rights, responsibilities, and reporting when it comes to equity. So this has been the journey so far. Amazing. And we're going to revisit this later. And today is really about sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, attraction, and behaviors. So this may be repetitive information to some of you. So if so, we just ask you to deepen your connections to the concepts and think about ways that you can share this information as an aspiring ally, as someone who boldly walks and navigates the world with these identities. And if this is new, of course, we just ask you to remain open. So let's do a little bit of centering, grounding, and breathing. So centering. I want to shout out Sadie Mayerstrand. I just had the opportunity, Shannon Wall, Sadie and I, to present for our student resident life staff, because they are in orientation all week. And Sadie led us in a little bit of yoga, a little deep breathing, pausing and understanding that we are navigating so much. The to-do lists, the life plates, professionally and personally, are overflowing. So we just want to give you an opportunity for a couple seconds to heighten your awareness of the moment. So if whether you're standing, sitting, in between, just pause. Try to find 3 things around you and your surroundings. We give thanks for everything that brought you to this moment, all of the tasks you've already done, the phone calls, the emails, the meetings, the trainings, the thinking, the evaluating, the assessing. And we know that there's more this afternoon, but right now we just want you to take a second and relax. When it comes to grounding, there's a visual, if you're able to see it, that just reiterates the chakras, because if you remember, that's how I began the series. And so we want you to vibrate with colors and light that resonate with you. Think about the different chakras, that you can clean them out. You can attract positivity into them. We just want to give gratitude for life, for our indigenous ancestors who loved on this land before any of us were thought about. And those who teach us to think 7 generations behind us. So we give honor to our indigenous folks and kin, to our ancestors, be they blood or not, to spirits, guides, angels, whatever is within or outside of any traditions that you may or may not gravitate to. We do want to express gratitude that many celebrated yesterday, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. We also want to layer that understanding and know that that was largely a campaign that won the right to vote for white women, and that many indigenous, Black, biracial women who had more melanin in their skin would continue to fight until the 1960s to truly earn that right. And they had to navigate poll tax, and they had to navigate literacy tests, and they had to navigate physical violence and lynching of themselves or loved ones. So we want to acknowledge, right, that whoever is writing the pen for history or herstory might not always have a complex layered understanding of how it disproportionately impacted different people. So we want to give thanks for the Black suffragists and suffragettes. We want to give thanks to Martha Jones, who's doing some incredible work and has a tie to St. Louis, who has a book coming in September called The Vanguard. And it talks just about this, how Indigenous Black and brown women were in the fight even before the Seneca Falls meeting. There's some information out there that the first gathering was a group of Black women in Philadelphia. So shout out to the Sister of Brotherly, Sisterly, and Non-Binary Love, that actually may have been one of the first gatherings of suffragettes of color. So we want to acknowledge that and know that we have so much work to move forward, and especially in the next coming months. So we just want to give gratitude. Take a second or two and just be grateful for whom and what is around you. And breathing. I'm going to ask Dre, what does breath and breathing mean to you? How do you use it as a tool in the incredible layered work that you do on a daily basis?
Well, definitely in all of the sessions I do, I try and do a little breathing before. Just the breath itself is really important. We don't often add that mindfulness element to it. So reminding ourselves to breathe and move through, especially because these conversations can be challenging, that it can be uncomfortable. And sometimes even when we're in that, our whole bodies tend to kind of like seize. We have a real body reaction. So breathing can help us move through things easier. And like you said, with the chakras, it can help us even move things up, move things down, try and get all of that stagnation energy out too. So breathing, I think, is really important just in my work, but also in life, when we can remember that whenever we really need it as an excellent tool.
Thank you. And I know that you happen to be a runner, so I know that you're always giving thanks for lungs that take in and exhale energy and the ability to get a run in certain days, even in very high temperatures. So we're going to take a second and we just encourage folks to breathe as you are able. You can breathe in for a 3 count and breathe out, or you can take 3 deep breaths, whatever works for you and the incredible body that you were given. So go ahead. Awesome. So this will be the final time for the summer that you all, we review the community agreements and some frameworks and beliefs within social justice. So Dre, if you will just tip in wherever you feel comfortable, if there's something else that you want to share for the good of our Stevens communities, we'd appreciate your brilliance. So the first one, if you don't know, Google it, ask. RTDB is read the damn book, do your homework before you ask. So instead of just running to a group that you want to be an aspiring ally to, do a little bit of work on your own. Ambiverts, keep moving in and out. So when we're face to face, we all know that it can be really easy sometimes for extroverts who don't normally possess fears of public speaking to speak once or twice or even a third time. And so now that we're doing so much more digitally, we still want to encourage folks that whether it's the chat or the Q&A, that you remember to share, maybe share a second time. If you get ready to do it that third time, why don't you encourage a colleague, encourage a student, encourage someone else to share. And our introverts, we dare you to share. We don't want you to be selfish. We don't want you to rob us of that brilliance and keep it to yourself because you're worried about how it's going to land to someone's ears or eyes. We need you to engage in this community. And sit in discomfort, defensiveness, awkwardness. Dre already named it for us. Sometimes our bodies get really tense. Sadie just told us earlier that often many of us are walking around with our shoulders kissing our ears. because we're so tight and we're thinking about what we haven't done, what we need to do. Could we have done it better, differently? So that comes into this work because we're breaking taboos. We are cycle breakers. We are taking private conversations public. So it's okay to embrace it.
And definitely too, I love questions. I love when people ask good questions, right? Don't feel afraid to ask the question with the language that you have. If I correct you in how you phrase the question, that's just a learning moment for us, and it's not shame-based, and I'm not trying to point you out. I really just want to, make a space where people feel comfortable asking with the language that they have, and we'll learn together through it. So I would rather you ask the question and it maybe be a little bit of an uncomfortable wording of the question than not ask it at all.
Yes. So we honor confidentiality in this space. So if people share identities, share pieces of their lived experience, we don't go run out and tell that because that would be a mental, physical, spiritual violation of that human being. But according to the words of Anissa Ward, who continues to do great work for one of the Penn State campuses in the space of DEI, quote, "What is learned here leaves here," end quote. Anissa always challenges us to take concepts and definitions and connections, aha moments that we make, and take them and go tell that to everybody. Post that on your social media, right? But not anyone's personal information or business. We're going to practice. This is another opportunity to practice active listening as much as possible. Dre just gave you all a gift, a nugget, which is saying, go ahead and ask. And if you are presented with correction or another way of saying or doing something, don't get defensive. Just embrace that as a teachable moment, a learning opportunity, an opportunity to relearn, reframe, or reclaim. And again, sit in defensiveness and awkwardness. So Dre, as we have had many times the pleasure of doing work together when I was in PA, we have embracing social justice is a lifetime work, right? And I know you're part of an organization that literally within the last 7 years changed models and actually went from not embracing social justice, though it was a nonprofit, to actually centering social justice and becoming a self-identified organization working towards anti-racism. So how do you see embracing a social justice framework in the work that you do?
I think it's really the only way. If we want to do right by people, we have to do right by all people. We have to make our spaces inclusive for all people, make sure people feel belonging, that they feel heard, respected, understood, held, all of these things all at the same time, right? And we just try our best to get as close as possible to centering the people that are most marginalized, because then it makes a space where everybody can thrive. That's what I think a social justice framework is, and it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be comfortable. But the closer we get to that, the closer we are to building a world that is really better for all of us.
Yes. So here's a couple reminders, community, of the work we've been doing all summer. So we unapologetically embrace that racism, like all forms of oppression, is pervasive. It's in everything. It hurts us all. It hurts people of color and white people, but it hurts us differently. And so because of that, we've got different work to do to eradicate it. Racism is a system of oppression and a system of advantage based on skin color. All racial prejudice was taught. Not one of us, right, came onto this planet and into this world with some preconceived notions about racism. It was taught to us directly and indirectly. And the good part is we can resist that teaching if we choose daily to unlearn it. None of us invented racism. It's a legacy that we inherited. We did not create it, yet in order to pay our rent or our mortgage on taking up space, we need to make sure we accept responsibility for our role and its continued existence. And all prejudice and oppressions are interwoven and entangled, right? So yes, this particular slide and this framework, racism is there, but as we've been doing, all summer, we know that racism is tied to sexism, to ageism, to classism, to Islamophobia, transphobia, to anti-Semitism, to ableism, and it keeps going. So we're stronger in solidarity than we are divided. All of us have had the experience as a target of oppression, as well as the experience of privilege. And that's because we may fall in different hierarchies depending on our different identities. There is no such thing as passive anti-racism. So we are either actively working against it or colluding with it. And if we're colluding with it, we're part of the problem. We're allowing it to continue. Here's some hope. Individuals, communities, and organizations can and do grow and change. Our commitment to eliminating racism and all forms of injustice is a lifelong one. So none of us are in this just to try to get a credential or just to put in our personnel files or in our CVs or on our applications for the next level of a credential that, oh yeah, I did this 9-part series, or oh yeah, I've gone to a training like that. I mean, if that's a bonus, that's a bonus, but we're asking you to commit to do this work knowing that we have a utopian, a liberation vision, and that every single day we've got to keep working towards this. And difference among humans is not a deficit. It is a gift. If we all came to the table, if we came to every problem, every challenge, thinking the exact same, then one, we probably wouldn't even think there was a challenge or a problem, and we definitely would have oversimplified solutions. So we need our different lived experiences, different learned experiences, all brought to the table so that as Dre has already said a couple times, it's for everybody. And we can attack problems from more perspectives, and then we can come up with more solutions. And you've seen this probably the last 3 or 4 times, but we just want to make sure that you don't get sidetracked, and that depending on the field you are in or your level of expertise or your subject matter expertise, that you think, oh, that must not be happening because it's named something differently. It's all still racism, it's just named differently. So in child welfare, it could be called, disproportionality. In healthcare, it's health disparities or inequities. In education, it's labeled the achievement gap. In criminal justice, it's desperate sentencing. In economic development, it's underutilized minority business enterprises or a lack of inclusive innovation. It all boils down to the isms and the phobias. And structural, the ability to grant or take away power, which is access to resources and opportunities. And you've been seeing this for a while. And I actually went back to one of my initial presentations at Stevens and added those little arrows, right? Because I was so into the work that I was DEE, DEI, diversity, equality, equity, on the path to inclusion. But truthfully, the destination is liberation. And I needed to be reminded by that. So I thank Nick Myron, who was our facilitator last week, who brought that back for me. But remember, diversity is the characteristics, those identities that we unapologetically walk in. When I shared Dre's bio, we have the honor, the privilege of witnessing Dre's life and learning from Dre, who identifies as Chicano, queer, transgender, and non-binary, just a few. We could add woodcarver. We can add director of training and development. We can add partner. We can add all kinds of things. And we want Dre to be able to feel welcomed and embraced and celebrated, not just tolerated, in any space that Dre graces. So sex, disability, age, race, all those things matter. Equality, we're removing those things from our vocabulary. Level playing field, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Color blindness, we have to move through it. We cannot stay there because we're getting to equity, which is we want to be color conscious. We want to account for the historical discrimination that has taken away access, opportunities, resources to individuals and groups. So we want to make sure we see what is happening now because it has direct ties to what has happened in the past. So we are DEE right now, on the path to DEI, on the path to liberation. And U.S. social institutions. So Dre, when you see these listed, what comes up for you in all the different ways you navigate the world and the work that you do in different spheres, educating different people? What do U.S. social institutions mean to you?
So our social institutions, right? So we've created these different parts of our lives, right, that operate and do certain things, which is great, right? We want to have government so that people feel supported. We want to have government so that people have their needs met. Like that truly is like supposed to be the function of government, right? Medicine to take care of our people, finance and banking where to keep our money. If an economy is it, under capitalism, is it fair? Maybe not. We think that's a whole other discussion. But
a whole other one.
Religion and spirituality to help us worship and praise and find something bigger than ourselves. Media to share our stories, and education to help us learn true histories. Legal so we have justice in our society, right? Again, is it really fair at this point in time? Are any of these truly fair at any point at this point in our time, right? When I see these institutions, what I think is all of them were set up by white, cisgender, straight, landowning, wealthy, white men. So we have to work on all of these institutions to make them more fair or dismantle them and recreate them to help support more people than just the most privileged people who set them up.
Awesome. Yes, good tip in. And so levels of which racism exist, again, a review, and we will continue to build on these for future terms. But Dre, how do you use tools? So you are teaching and educating and sharing space with different folks, whether it's Temple University, Harrisburg campus, moderating at transgender training institutes and gatherings, like the largest gatherings on the East Coast of trans-identified folks. So how does a tool like this, benefit you in the way that you do work?
This diagram?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so it helps to break it down at these different levels. So racism, for example, is a form of oppression, and it's not just happening systemically. It's happening within institutions I talked about in the previous slide. It's happening between people, your coworkers, your friends and family, your neighbors, the people who you go to church with, and it's happening individually. You have biases and you have prejudices that are within you because of how you were taught, and you just existing in this world that is in and of itself created to be racist and to exclude people. So it's pervasive from the micro level to the macro level. It's not any just one of them. And when we focus on something that is an oppression at the micro level, it becomes a thoughts and feelings conversation. And then we never get to fixing our institutions because we're trying to solve racism just in people's hearts, just in people's minds. And it's really just not enough. And it works the same way with all other oppressions, right? Homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism, xenophobia. There are just a huge list of ways in which we oppress people. And it happens at every single level.
Yes. So you are wrapping up this inaugural summer series. And what a time for us to be doing this, correct? So we were waiting on 3 different cases that hit the Supreme Court. We are in a presidential election cycle. We are navigating a pandemic of COVID-19. We are navigating a racial pandemic based off of the disease of racism. Just to be a few things that are going on. So here's a visual for those of you who are able to see it that speaks to some of the things going on in the country right now and the intersections of that. So sex, what you were assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, attractions, and behaviors. So a quick reminder that specifically, heterosexism. So we saw that earlier in the series when we talked about isms and phobias. The definition based on the formula from the 2001 United Nations: sexual orientation prejudice plus the misuse of systemic and institutional power. And that's huge. Again, you're not going to be a great guest at a cocktail party because if you only want to talk about it from hearts and minds, or you're vouching for people's reputation, you're missing the whole systemic structural piece of power. And we have transphobia, which may be one of the first times we've defined that in this series. So Dre, when you're doing your work, how do you define, what is this concept of transphobia?
All right, so we think about homophobia, it's that prejudice leading to discrimination, leading to institutionalized homophobia, so marginalizing queer people, lesbian, gay, bisexual people. When we think about transphobia, it's a similar thing, but it's about gender identity outside of being cisgender and identifying on that binary as well. So transphobia, like you have here, is like that fear, hatred, disbelief at that micro level, but also the systemic things like not being able to include additional gender markers on licenses or IDs, or not having a gender neutral bathroom in a public facility. Things like that are also transphobia.
Mm-hmm. So I am going to switch out of this because Dre sent amazing materials, and I want to be able to show you all this. Oh, I think I just switched it, didn't I? Bear with me. So I'm gonna go get it now because now it wants to disappear. All right. So can you all see that? Feel free to put it in the chat. It's a work in progress.
I think if you put it like the zoom at 100, it should be able to show the whole document.
Oh, okay.
And the header's not so important, so we can.
Flip the page.
We are only going to do 1 through 11 today, so.
Is that better?
Sure, we can do it this way, or if people wanted to, the way before where we could see almost the whole thing, then people can take 5 or so minutes to write down their answers to what they think these are. Again, we're only doing 1 through 11. This is just a way for me to help guide the discussion around terminology and also not lecture you for an hour.
Wonderful. So given Dre's instructions, go ahead, take a couple minutes, read each definition below, and then do your best to match with a term that's in the box.
And then I will set a timer. Just do your best. It's really just for you to see where you're at. It's for you to see what words you already know, which words you need clarification on, and where you're completely lost. So I will give everybody just a few minutes to do that. I'll call it back to attention, doing 1 through 11. That's it, easy as pie.
So Dre, if you're able, will you go into the chat and make sure I haven't missed anything? Because I don't want to minimize or mess with my screen too much. Appreciate you.
Okay, finish up where you're at. No pressure to get all the way to 11 because we're going to go through the answers all together. And I want everybody to just take a note of how you feel after completing that, what emotions are coming up for you. Definitely, if you'd like to share, you can put it in the chat as well, just however you're feeling, whether you're feeling maybe a little confused or challenged. Maybe you felt rushed to get to the answers right away. Maybe you feel excited about learning a little bit more. That's typically how I encourage you to frame this too, is that if you're having a moment of feeling a little challenged, a little flustered, a little worried that maybe you didn't know as much as you thought, then it's definitely a good moment to take note of, like, this is an opportunity for me to learn something new and to really dive into it and get some new knowledge. So I encourage you to move forward with that in mind. And we're going to go right into it, all right? Like I said, questions. Would definitely like you to put questions in the chat. Like I said before, use the language that you have. I want folks to feel comfortable reaching out to me and using me as a resource here to answer your questions. Not a lot of times you get to ask trans people questions about being trans in an appropriate environment, so this is a good chance to do that. And let's go through this together slowly, okay? So number one is a person's sexual, emotional, physical, and psychological attraction to other people would be S. So that's sexual orientation. So when we think about the LGBTQ plus community, the letters L, G, B, Q, and sometimes plus, are the sexual orientation parts of that. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, questioning, and plus can describe sexual orientation. It's that those three components, or those four components all together, to make someone's sexual orientation. It can't just be who we find attractive when we walk by somebody on the street, right? It's much, much more than that. It's much more complex than that. So remembering those things is part of it. That it's about attraction. That's what sexual orientation is about. And that the L, the G, the B, the Q, and plus are sexual orientation. The rest of this discussion is mostly about gender identity, which is a completely different thing. So remembering that gender and sexual orientation are different. They are completely separate. They don't have any bearing on one another, any influence on one another. It's just two different parts of somebody's identity and how they understand themselves. And then two, a person's combination of genitals, chromosomes, and hormones would be biological sex. So that's letter C. And in the same way, it has to be all of those components together. It has to be genitals, chromosomes, and hormones. And a person's body makes up their biological sex. I don't know how many of you would have access to somebody's chromosomal makeup or their hormone levels in their body or being able to look at somebody's genitals. So most of us don't have to be too concerned about biological sex. It's mostly just people's doctors, and like when that information is relevant, they might want to know somebody's biological sex. But working in academia, maybe not. It's probably less important. 3 is the sex that someone is labeled at birth, usually based off of the appearance of the genitals. So that is sex assigned at birth, letter K, sex assigned at birth. You can see that it's different than biological sex because it's not about the chromosomes and the hormones and the genitals. It's just about how the genitals looked when that baby was born. So typically, we've known this, labeled this as female, male, and intersex. So I really want to challenge you to reframe that in your mind and go forward using assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, or intersex. So you might also see them represented as these acronyms, AFAB, or AMAB, standing for assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth. So if you maybe have some forms in your office or something that ask for somebody's sex assigned at birth or what might show up on their ID, if you see somebody putting AFAB or AMAB, that would be what that means. And you might also want to first take note if that information is really relevant to your office and needs to be on the form in the first place, or if you want to add these options onto there along with intersex so people can self-select and also be able to write things in if those words don't feel good to them. So that was sex assigned at birth. 4 is a person's deep-seated internal sense of their own gender. So how somebody understands their gender in their heart, in their mind, in their spirit, that is somebody's gender identity. And that is N, person's deep-seated internal sense of their own gender. N. So this is the one where it's not determined by a doctor, it's not determined by a mental health professional, it's not determined by a psychologist, it's determined by that person. It has to be that person's internal sense of who they are because nobody else can evaluate that for them. Nobody else can define that for them. Everybody has a gender identity. I have a gender identity, Shaashawn has a gender identity, each person in this call has a gender identity. It's not just a transgender thing. Everyone has a gender identity. So that can be being a man, being a woman, being non-binary, which I'll talk about later. It's really just that person's internal sense of who they are. So that would bring us to 5. A term used to describe a person whose biological sex and gender identity are congruent or match would be A, and that's pronounced cisgender. You might also see it abbreviated to cis or CIS there, is cis. So I'd like to give an example to illustrate this. So my brother was born, and they looked at my brother, and they said, oh, a beautiful baby boy. And they assigned him male at birth. My brother is able to communicate with everybody that they were right, that for him, his sex assigned at birth and his gender identity, they match. So my brother is cisgender. You can probably think of cisgender people in your life to kind of give that a little bit more context, or maybe you yourself are cisgender. But I like to kind of challenge you to think about that and then put it in terms of people that you know. So then 6 is a term used to describe a person whose biological sex and gender identity are incongruent or do not match, and that is transgender, which is letter I. So I was born, and they looked at me and they said, oh, a beautiful baby girl, and they put female on my birth certificate. Now, I can communicate to everybody that they were absolutely wrong, that my sex assigned at birth and my gender identity do not match, so I'm transgender, okay? You can probably think of other transgender people who are in your life. Maybe you yourself are transgender, but that's what that means. Are we understanding the difference there between those two words, cisgender and transgender? Okay. So then 7 is the gendered way that a person dresses or presents themselves. And that is gender expression, which is M. So everybody has a gender expression too. I have a gender expression, Shaashawn has a gender expression, everyone on the call has a gender expression. So it's all about the way or the choices we make every day to express ourselves. So some people dress, or the choices we make every day to express our gender in clothing, in hairstyle, in haircuts, in how we cross our legs, and how we dance, and how we interact with each other. Everything that has a gendered connotation to it can be part of gender expression, right? Gender expression can also be very variable. Sometimes it's just personal choice, what feels good for that person in that day. So, you know, somebody might dress a little bit more masculinely one day, the next day decide they want to dress a little bit more femininely, express themselves a little bit more femininely. Some people have a more constant gender expression, and both are fine. It's really just up to the person and what feels most comfortable for them. But there's also some other barriers to expressing your gender in the way that you'd like. One is finances. So if you can't buy new clothes, get your hair cut the way you'd like, buy makeup, anything that involves purchasing something, then that's a barrier to expressing your gender in the way that you'd like. Another is safety. So if I know I'm going somewhere where other transgender people have been harassed or discriminated against or been victims of violence because of their gender expression, I might dress a little more neutrally. I might express myself a little bit more neutrally. This is definitely not at all what I would like to do, but is sometimes a choice I have to make in order to at least reduce the risk of something bad happening to me where I'm going, because I know there's a very real danger for a lot of transgender people. And we know that that danger is also really heightened for folks who are experiencing multiple systems of oppression and have intersectional identities. So, for example, a very sad, unfair, and you know, realistic part of the world is that transgender women of color, particularly Black trans women, experience the most violence amongst trans people. And we know that this harassment and violence, and often deadly violence, is also not reported in the community or in media, and it's very pervasive, and people don't want to pay attention to it. So often people are fearing for their own lives, and that can be a barrier to them expressing their gender in the way that they'd like to. So just knowing that gender expression varies for different reasons. Just personal choice and what feels good for that person, but also some very real barriers for folks. The next one is number 8. A term used to describe a person whose gendered appearance does not conform to traditional masculinity or femininity would be gender non-conforming, which is B. So anybody can be gender non-conforming. It's not just a transgender thing. Anyone can be gender non-conforming. Women who wear suits are gender non-conforming. Men who wear nail polish are gender non-conforming. It's really just stepping outside of that box of what is expected of you for your gender identity. And then number 9 is the affirming way to refer to a person who identifies as a woman but was assigned female at birth. And number 9 is H, transgender women. Not all transgender women are going to want to be called transgender women. They are just women. So we don't need to create this, hyper-focus on the transgender part of transgender womanhood. They're just women. And then the next one is the affirming way to refer to a person who identifies as a man but was assigned female at birth, and that's transgender man. In the same way, not all transgender men are going to want you to call them transgender men. They are just men. And 11, which is our last word that we're going to focus on today, is the approved medical process for changing one's body to be more aligned with a gender identity, and that is medical transition. This is the part of trans experiences that gets all of the focus. We are really hyper-focused on people's medical transition, when really there are a lot of other parts of trans people's experiences that just don't get a lot of attention because we can't sensationalize them in the media. So, the true reality is that the majority of transgender people don't pursue any kind of medical transition at all. That is for a number of reasons, right? Personal choice is one of them. Like, not all trans people want to change their bodies at all. There are transgender people who are completely comfortable in their bodies and don't need to seek out any kind of medical transition. But there are also people who do want to medically transition who can't because of finances. We know that transgender people are unemployed at a far greater rate than cisgender Americans. So how do we get our healthcare coverage? Through our work, and usually through a salary job that offers health benefits. So knowing that not a lot of trans people have really secure forms of health insurance, and it can be really hard even when you do have health insurance. So health insurance, they don't want to pay for anybody's health care. If they can make it difficult for somebody to get the care that they need, they will. And it's really easy to do that for transgender people. If you look at the guidelines for coverage of care for, say, hormone replacement therapy or some sort of surgical intervention, they are lengthy, they are confusing, they are not consistent from insurance provider to insurance provider. They are different from state to state. There are literally states that have better insurance coverage with Highmark Blue Shield, for example, than a neighboring state that has the same Highmark Blue Shield. It's bizarre, right? It doesn't make any sense. But it does make it really hard to cover transgender medical transition, right? And it's really, really expensive. So without any kind of insurance covering it, even parts of it, it can be thousands of dollars. There's people who need prescriptions every single month. Some people are taking their prescriptions every single day or every single week, and that money really racks up. And surgeries can be anywhere from $8,000 to $30,000, depending on the surgery that the person needs. It is ridiculous. And it's life-saving care. It is medically necessary care, and transgender people don't have access to it. They don't have fair access to this kind of care. So to hyper-focus on the medical aspects of this is outrageous to me, just because the majority of transgender people don't want to or can't, right? We focus on people who have, celebrities who have had the access because they've had the financial privilege to do so. And we don't ever talk about how hard it is to get insurance covered, how hard it is to find a doctor, how hard it is to find a doctor just if you have a cold and you're transgender. And those are all injustices towards the trans community. But there are also two other really important parts that we always forget about. We always forget about these parts. So the first one I want to talk about is legal transition. And that is when somebody begins to legally change their name and gender marker on documents. So everything from your state ID to birth certificate to transcripts to your insurance, car insurance registration, anything that has your name on it. I'm sure you could write a whole 20 pages of things that have your legal name on it. A transgender person might want to change those documents for themselves. And it's a really hard process. So it is not consistent from state to state. I know we're talking from two different geographic regions, but I'll give you kind of the perspective, what happens here in Pennsylvania, and typically what I'm seeing in most states as well, is that it's a different process from county to county. It's even harder to do if you were born in one state or born in one county and now reside in a new state or a new county. It's also really expensive. So in the county we live in, Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, it's $500 to get your name legally changed, and that is just the first step. That is for things like your state ID, $500. You have to do things like visit all of these various offices, and if you don't have the step-by-step instructions, you're really at a loss. So we do give out step-by-step instructions at the LGBT Center, which is very helpful to people, but not everybody knows we have them. So people are just confused. It's a lot of money. You might have to be interfacing with a bunch of transphobic people throughout the process. And here in this county, you have to publish it in the newspaper that you're changing your name, which is it's really not a safe practice for a lot of transgender people. And you have to go before a judge with a room of other people that, you know, can just be sitting in that day or also changing their name that day, and say what your name was going to be and why, which is another really dangerous situation to put transgender people in. It really exposes people. It is, you know, a very vulnerable situation. It invades people's privacy, and it's just an old, outdated, antiquated system that nobody is making moves to change anytime soon. So, thankfully, there's places like Trans Lifeline who have an online archive of these packets of information, like how to get your certain documents changed in the region where you live. But we shouldn't have to be making packets in the first place, right? This is right now, that's like kind of mitigating the harm, but the fact is that's one of those institutions that just need to be thrown away, dismantled, and recreated. So that's legal. It's being changed, and it can take a long time. I know people who have been doing it for over a decade and still don't have all of their documents changed. I've been working with people who have actually paid lawyers to do it for them and still have taken more than a decade to get everything done. I've known people who have everything they could possibly want changed except for his passport. And his passport's not changed, not because he hasn't done the paperwork right. He meets every criteria. He's done it at the right steps. We just assumed that whoever got that form saw that that person was transgender, and that's why they were changing their name, and probably just put that on the back burner or threw it away, or is doing something that is wrong because they're transphobic and don't want a transgender person to have their passport changed. That's the only thing that we could possibly imagine would be happening to that person. So just knowing that it's a really hard part of somebody's life to try and go through legal transition. And if you're working with a transgender person whose documents maybe don't match the name or the gender marker that they're telling you, it's a good time to kind of handle that with some patience, know that it's a vulnerable situation, and to be kind and affirming and supportive, even though the documents don't necessarily have the name that that person uses on them. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Yes, I would stay away from any kind of questions about transition unless somebody opens up to you about it. Like I said, it's like a very vulnerable place to be. It's a very, very private information. It can also bring up a lot of emotions for that person that maybe they're just like not ready to handle at that time, maybe don't feel ready to share with you. I would stay away from questions like that unless that person is initiating the conversation. Okay, so the other part is social transition. And this is the part that is actually will affect your work the most because you work with people. Everybody works with people, right? And also everybody, even if you're, you know, somebody who isn't interfacing with people in your work day, you're interfacing with people outside of your work. So this is relevant information for everybody. A social transition is just when somebody tells you, like, oh, this is the name I'd like to go by. These are the pronouns I'd like you to use to refer to me. And it can also be things like, hi, I know I've been going to this gym. I'm going to start using this other locker room because it aligns better with my gender identity. Or, I know I've been working in this office for a long time, but is there a way that we can make the bathrooms gender neutral? Because I need a gender neutral bathroom. So anything that has a social component and somebody is making a change, asking you to make a change to affirm and support them is part of a social transition. That is, we are all living social lives. So this is actually the part that is most important and I swear gets talked about the least. So those are the three parts: medical, social, legal. And we want to know about all of them, because it's not okay to just focus on what the media is covering and what gets most sensationalized. I believe that is the end of that worksheet. And we do have one more presentation slide, because this worksheet doesn't cover non-binary.
Let me go pull that. I had them all up, and then it decided that it didn't want to participate with me. That's what happens when you prepare, and then you're like, wait, there we go. This one, right, Dre?
I don't see it shared.
Oh, hold on, I might not be sharing it. Bear with me. How about now?
Perfect. All right, so this is just a quick slide, a couple notes about non-binary. So in the simplest of terms, it is just a word that describes someone who is not a man and who is not a woman. It can also be an umbrella term for many other identities that fall into that very simple category of people who did not identify as men or as women. That's a binary, with men on one side and women on the other side. So saying somebody is non-binary means they are outside of that, outside of those two categories. This is typically where people say, hey, Dre, you've lost me. And it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We have spent our whole lives in a world that has categorized things in those two categories, in man and woman, sister and brother, mother and father, waiter and waitress, actress and actor, right? The list goes on and on and on. We categorize the world in those two ways to try and make sense of it, but the reality is that the world does not function in that way, that people don't function in that way. All dichotomies are false dichotomies, right? We don't live in extremes as humans. So there are plenty of people who understand their own gender identity to be outside of that, to be something other than that. And there are many, many ways that somebody can be non-binary. Like here I've got genderqueer, gender fluid, agender. These are all gender identities that fall under that non-binary umbrella. And the thing is, you don't have to understand it to respect and affirm and support non-binary people. Like I am also non-binary, identify as genderqueer. And I have no idea what it's like to be a man, and I have no idea what it's like to be a woman, but I still respect and affirm and support people who are men and women, even though I have no idea what that really means to them and their gender identity. So all that to say, ease your tensions a little bit. Sit in the discomfort, but let it dissipate and flow out of you. So you don't have to necessarily understand that. You just have to respect and affirm people in the ways that they're asking you to. Another couple of notes, right? We talked about gender expression, which is the gendered way that a person expresses themselves through clothes, through behavior, through hairstyles and other gendered ways of expression. And anybody can have a gender expression. Non-binary people can have any kind of gender expression. There's this idea that non-binary people need to look androgynous or look like they're mixing gender up to be non-binary. That's not the case, right? Non-binary people can have any gender expression that they like and feel comfortable to them. And it can, just like for everybody else, it can be constant or it can be flexible, and it can change over time, or it can just be the same until they leave this world. Gender expression functions in the same way for non-binary people. You are never going to be able to look at somebody and say, oh, they're non-binary, right? You can't look at anybody really and tell what their gender identity is based off of how they're expressing themselves. Just keeping that in mind too. We don't want to be making any kind of assumptions about people based on their gender expression. And like I said, this is before in the previous activity, gender non-conforming. Anybody can be gender non-conforming, okay? So to look at somebody and say that person's gender non-conforming, that's really all you're able to identify, is that that person has stepped out of what's expected of gender for them. And I have these two pictures here. So if you're familiar with the show Pose, that's Billy Porter. He is in his very famous tuxedo dress, the Oscars. This is an example of Billy Porter being gender nonconforming, right? He's stepping outside of what's expected of him and his gender identity, and wearing a dress to a formal event. And Billy Porter is not transgender. Billy Porter is cisgender. He's a cisgender man. He just happens to be gender nonconforming and looking fabulous doing it too, I add. And the other picture in the front here is Lena Waithe. And she's, director, actress, multi-talented human being, right? Is wearing a suit to a very formal event and also looking great doing it. And is also cisgender. Lena Waithe is not a transgender person. Lena Waithe is a cisgender woman and just happens to be expressing her gender in a more masculine way. That's totally fine. So just two examples of how gender expression is not indicative of somebody's gender identity, and that we can note that somebody may be gender nonconforming, but that doesn't mean anything about who they are. It just means their expression is just outside of what we would expect. Does that sound pretty clear? I always like to have a moment where I can talk about fashion if I can, just throw it in there.
Well, I always appreciate, right, when we are able to uplift, Black, brown, biracial, right, multiracial, queer folks, so I'm often using, on my media platforms, hashtag, QTPOC, which is queer, trans, people of color, which is always a conscious act on my part, not saying that mine is everyone else's view, to remind that I'm living in the intersections, right, as a queer, Black, cisgender, able-bodied woman, and that just the larger LGBT movement historically has not always included Black and brown and indigenous folks. So I just appreciate that you highlighted Billy Porter, who has built a massive career. I mean, Broadway, I think he's an EGOT person. So one of the few who has like the Emmy, Tony, Grammy, Oscar. So I think he's in there, or at least in the hunt. And I think there's only 5 or 6 people who've ever done that. Whoopi Goldberg's one, for instance. And then Lena, who is on fire. I mean, started as a writer and has 2 or 3 simultaneous shows, 20s on BET. Did the feature film, Queen and Slim, right? And then putting other people on. So if anyone watches The Chi, which is an incredible show, CHI, all about Chicago, Lena is breaking ground there by creating like masculine presenting roles for folks and showing a married couple and showing intercourse and intimacy in a very prime time way, I guess I would say, between 2 brown loving queer folks. So just, when one person gets in there with these identities, then the opportunities that are created for everyone. So I appreciate you in highlighting that.
Yeah, and I want to kind of jump back to something you said earlier in this discussion we were opening up, is that, you know, homophobia and transphobia are like tools of white supremacy, right? Like our ancestors were doing this, like we're still doing this. We're still being gender non-conforming and trans and like outside of that binary. Like our pre-colonial ancestors, I'm getting chills, they're with me, are like, had been doing this and had the binary imposed and the gender norms imposed, and violently so. So this is really just a continuation of our histories. This isn't anything new. And we've really been here, been doing it. And, you know, we gotta give credit to that and acknowledge that too, that this is a function of racism to make people fit into two categories.
Yes, there's an excellent book I encourage people to go find. It's called Feminine Husbands and Masculine Wives. And it actually talks about gender identity, gender expression, the fact that most of the world does not have a binary gender system, right? That they've got multiple ways of expressing gender, and that third group is often the group that is seen to have spiritual gifts, that is seen to have, you know, the abilities of equal parts or a beautiful mix of masculinity and femininity. And so, you know, again, we have to get out of what has been constructed for us here and what's been put upon us here. So thank you for naming that. I love that. That is one of my many gifts from you today, is that this is a continuation of our communities, who we were, what we did before colonization, before racism, before binary gender norms that were placed upon us without our consent.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
All right, how much time do you have? I got a little scared earlier because I saw your clock in the bottom and I thought it was my clock, and I was like, oh, we have too much time now. So I think I will just talk a little bit about pronouns, really it's some pretty simple stuff. We can get real caught up in it and make it more complicated than it needs to be, but I will just give you exactly what you need, all right? This is an excellent info graphic about pronouns. This is totally shareable too, so you can print out 1 million and put them all over campus. You can send them to everybody's inbox. You can put it on your kitchen fridge. You can send it to your whole church. Whatever you want to do with this, go for it. I encourage you to share as much as possible. So what are pronouns? Pronouns are just like the fill-in word we use when we're like referring to somebody. So common sets of pronouns, he, him, his. We traditionally have been using that to refer to men and masculine people. She, her, hers. Traditionally use that set to refer to women or feminine people. But we also have sets like they, them, theirs, which are gender neutral sets. And it is okay to use they, them pronouns to refer to one person. We're talking about singular they, them, and theirs. So typically people at this point are saying like, oh, Dre, that's grammatically incorrect. I'm not going to do it. Well, let me tell you a few things. So William Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, and Jane Austen, so many other authors have also used singular they in their writing. Merriam-Webster Dictionary included they, them, theirs as a singular gender-neutral pronoun in their dictionary last year. The APA style guide said if you can use they, them singular to refer to one person if that's their pronouns, and we are using this all of the time without even realizing it. If you are expecting a package to come to your house that day, you come home, you ask your roommate, oh, did they drop off the package, right? Typically one person's dropping off your package, but you still use the they, right? Or if you are if you are driving home from work and somebody cuts you off in traffic, you might say, oh, they're a real a-hole, right? Typically one person driving a car, we're still using they, them, theirs in a singular way. It is okay. We have been doing this, right? It just might take a little bit of time to practice pronouns,
to try and get them right every single time. And the thing is, we are afraid of messing up because we don't want people to think that we're not supportive and affirming and there for that person. But the thing is, we're gonna mess up. We're gonna mess up. So what do we do when we mess up is what we should be focusing on. We should be self-correcting in that moment, right? So you've messed up somebody's pronouns, just redo the statement with the right pronoun, and then move forward using the right pronouns every time. We want to really try and make sure that we're getting it right every single time. Misgendering can have a really detrimental impact on somebody's mental health. Some people are getting misgendered tens of times a day, hundreds of times a day, and it is the cumulative effect of that can really be dangerous for that person, if we're being honest, right? This is also an act of suicide prevention. Getting people's pronouns right is an act of suicide prevention. And I truly mean that because nearly 50% of transgender people have attempted suicide at some point in their life. That is directly related to the kind of transphobia that they're experiencing in their life, and for the world not seeing them as they truly are. And misgendering is a reminder of the world not seeing them as who they truly are. This is also an act of suicide prevention. So keeping all that stuff in mind, it is grammatically correct. We do it all the time, and it's also really important if we want to create safe, affirming, healthy communities, interactions between us and our friends and our students and our loved ones. There's also neo-pronouns too, and there are many sets of these pronouns. So many so that we couldn't include them all in this infographic. So I would definitely check out mypronouns.org, and this is your homework. So really go look at that, explore the pronouns pages, use this as a free resource to practice pronouns, to better understand them. And one other tip I will give you, which is an excellent piece of homework too, is to think of your favorite like childhood story, a story about a princess or a Little Red Riding Hood or a Little Mermaid or something like that, and try and use they, them pronouns for the main character while you're telling the story. This is a great thing to do with you and your cisgender friends, your friends who are trying to use they, them pronouns and make it a more regular, comfortable thing, is call them up every Wednesday, every Tuesday, Thursday, and you tell your friend a story, and you use they, them pronouns for the main character through the whole story. I promise you, the more you do this, the easier it'll be, and you will feel much less uncomfortable when you have to use it for somebody in your life, okay? So that is the homework, mypronouns.org, and practicing pronouns by telling stories to your friends. And sharing pronouns is also really important. So I neglected to do that. See, we all make mistakes. Shaashawn helped by sharing my pronouns in my introduction, but you can also share your pronouns by your name on Zoom. You can share your pronouns in your email signature. You can share your pronouns on your social media, and you can share your pronouns when you're meeting somebody new in person. So I would say, hi, I'm Dre Ceja. I use they, them pronouns every time you're introducing somebody. Why is this important? This is important because we want to normalize this practice. Every room that I'm in, I'm the person who has to share my pronouns. I'm the only person sharing my pronouns, and then I'm definitely the person in the room who's also explaining and educating people on my own time about why pronouns are important, and we want to create spaces where transgender people don't have to do that. So sharing your pronouns as much as possible, it normalizes the practice. You could make this St. Stephen's wide. It could just be a cool thing that you do on that campus to be more trans inclusive. And we'll, of course, want to expand that out to every space that we occupy. I will leave you with that. If there are any additional questions, it looks like we have 2 minutes left.
You're okay.
I'm trying to do as much as possible.
Dre, you're fine. Don't. We always, the last couple have gone longer. just because we've been in the process. So, you know, we want to acknowledge that we know time is of the essence. So those who need to jump off at 1:30 because you have a prior commitment, feel free. We honor that you're with us. We thank you for traveling this journey, and anything you missed, these are recorded, so you can come back and watch the last couple minutes. Thanks, Dre. I'm frantically like, okay, these are all my notes so far, as usual. Anytime you open your mouth and I get to learn. So I will commit, you and I will co-draft a follow-up email. So many of these things we will make sure we put in the follow-up email as we've been doing the previous 8 sessions. So we will make sure that links are there and that the 2 pieces of homework that Dre has delivered for our Stevens communities will be there. So the mypronouns.org and then tell a story using they, them pronouns. These are some that I researched ahead of time, and these have a very Missouri focus. So the Center Project is in Columbia, Missouri. Glow Center, I believe, is either in Jeff City or Fulton, one of the 2. I do have the web address there for the LGBT Center, where Dre is a member of the amazing staff. Shout out to Gabe, Amanda Arbor, Carter, all the phenomenal human beings who work there that I miss. I miss you all so much. Also, some folks at the Stevens community know that I was able to serve as a full year and make herstory, as Stevens women do. I was the first co-vice chair of Governor Wolf's Commission on LGBT Affairs, which is the first commission of its kind in the entire country. And so I have that website there where you can learn more about the commission and the work that they're doing. There's a couple other things. The NGLCC is a organization that does a national certification for businesses that are owned by LGBTQ folks, right? And this is, again, when equity matters more than equality because of the historical discrimination, right? There have been laws that were written in all 50 states that said you could be criminalized if you wore clothing that was opposite in what you were assigned at birth. There were laws that said LGBT people couldn't own businesses, couldn't work as teachers, couldn't do these different things. So that was exclusion written through our US social institutions that kept people away from being able to do what they needed to or love. And so businesses, if they are over 50% owned, they have to be at least 50% owned by an LGBTQ identified person, then they can go for a certification for that business. And so when we're thinking about diverse suppliers, when we're thinking about folks who have consulting businesses and merchandise and everything else, that is a way that we are supporting, being an ally, showing up for that, right? NBJC is the National Black Justice Coalition. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, LGBT org of color. You've got HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign, Trans Equality, Transgender Law Center. So all of these are different resources that now are at your disposal to go do work, right? Remember, read the damn book, Google first, go do your own homework before you run to people and ask them to do even more emotional labor than they're doing already. Martha Jones is who I mentioned when we were doing our grounding and our gratitude. So Martha's the one who has the book coming out about Black suffragettes and suffrage. And then Dre named Pose. So you can watch, I think, the first 2 seasons on Netflix. And it isn't just the stories being told. This is revolutionary. It is about who is directing, who is writing episodes. Pose is the first, all the lead characters and lead actors in Pose are trans women of color, or at least non-gender conforming, non-binary folks of color. So when that's huge. That's history, her story, their story, them story. And of course, who are the extras in the room? Are they taking oral histories from the elders in our communities? I just recently saw, and I'm gonna forget her name, but she was in the original film Paris is Burning. And then she came out just a couple of years ago. She's one of our transgender women elders. and built a career, but was always worried that she would be discovered and she would be found out, and that her access to working would be taken. And so just research. There's something else that you can do in the spirit of aspiring allyship, which is you can pass this link on, we'll put it in the follow-up email, to Black female writers of color. Midnight and Indigo, they're looking for submissions. So if you know someone who's a writer and is Black and female, make sure you share that. Don't forget about the existing things that are going on. There's another call for submission from the Daniel Boone Regional Library. For my data folks, you can go to Boone Indicators and tell the story through statistics. We have the Heart of Missouri United Way Equity Challenge is in the 6th week right now, but that's okay. You can still sign up and do it according to your own pace. And there's still the 10-day curriculum from the University of Missouri and their IDE department. So we want to remember that in this 9th of 9 summer webinars, that diversity is not just the sole responsibility of the director of DEI and or the senior leadership team. It's not, okay? Yes, I'm the one who's occupying the role, but it's all of our responsibility. Just like admission, retention, recruitment, promotion is everybody's job, right? And so all of us play a part in creating equitable, inclusive, just learning, living, and inclusive environments. And so that means we are doing work on the relationship level, in our structures, in our symbols, in our research and evaluation, and by politics. And so I want to pause and thank Dre because you have contributed so much to my life. And when it comes to relationship, you have really taught me something that now I work with others, which is early in our relationship, we were in a meeting, not sure if you remember this, working with some of our LGBTQ identified youth, and I misgendered you. And you immediately corrected me, and I turned and I apologized, and then I moved forward and I vowed to not get it wrong again. But you taught me in that moment not to get defensive, not to stop and make some huge crazy scene and stick the spotlight on you to have to then worry about my fragile ego. We moved forward, and then later I did one-on-one come and be like, I'm so sorry, I don't know how that happened, and please forgive me. And you were just like, you're human. I corrected you. I already know you're gonna do better to get it right. And when I tell you, like I could cry now, but I'm not, that was a fundamental learning experience for me. And that because I went through that, I have since been on a path to make sure that I am doing my best to minimize defensiveness, that I look at things as a teachable moment, that I am open to correction because I cannot know what I cannot know, right? And I don't know how to navigate the world as a non-binary person or a trans person. So even as a member, proud, unapologetic rainbow rocker, I always have work to do intra-community and inter-community. And so I thank you for the mercy, favor, grace that you have shown me and the way that you freaking navigate this world with your identities. I have always believed in you, and I'm just grateful that you exist in this world. And social media platform is on fire, by the way. So you'll have to do the work to see if you can locate Dre, unless you feel comfortable sharing your Instagram, but absolutely visually pleasing, and you have made my day, many, many a day. So I honor you and thank you. Also, returning back to the slides, look at the journey we have done, Stevens. So we started in June, early June, with a community conversation. We had an alumna listening session, and then we really launched this series, and it was cultural humility and cultural competence. We've been meeting with the group, The Sirens. We talked about defining isms in the cage of oppression, implicit bias, intersectionality, right, with Dr. Amber Sessoms, privilege and allyship with Sarah Crosby, who's an aspiring ally, anti-Blackness with Dr. Darian Davenport, white supremacy with Nick Myron, and now sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, attraction, and behaviors with the Dre Ceja. So now you've got to go and do the work. So some thank yous. I want to thank President Lynch and the senior leadership team for support and attendance, for participants and attendees, of course, for all the co-facilitators, Dr. Amber Sessoms, Sarah Crosby, Dr. Darian Davenport, Nick Myron, Dre Ceja, and Lita for technology coordination and troubleshooting. Thank you to Severin Roberts for establishing and managing the Eventbrite from week to week. Thank you. Thank you to Ellen Orner and Jennifer Kropp for our marketing, web design, graphic design, video editing gurus who make sure that this series is now part of Her Story, History, Their Story, Them Story on the Stevens YouTube page and the DEI page. And I want to make sure that you get that every single choice that I made in this series was by design. So it wasn't just the content that was shared, it was who was bringing you this content. So I hope that you understand that that was a gift. That's part of social justice, not just what the information is, but who is delivering it and how many times you can be exposed. So you got the gift today to learn from a Chicano, queer, transgender, non-binary facilitator, a Black, queer, cisgender female facilitator. That was me. A Black cisgender female facilitator, a white cisgender female facilitator, a Black heterosexual cisgender male facilitator, and a white heterosexual cisgender male facilitator, all rocking their identity, all embracing cultural humility, all on the path of aspiring allyship, knowing certain days you just jack it up and you need to issue an apology, distance yourself from your ego, and do better the next day. And folks who are consistently learning and growing and pushing and moving. And so now you've got to move that forward as we are a week away, no, not even a week, days away, a day, 2 days away from our new students and our incoming class of first year, first term students of coming on here. So who are you putting in front of them? You know, if you're staff, what do the spaces look like that students are entering? And how are we greeting them? And how are we delivering services to them? You know, faculty, what are the models being used? How are we decolonizing curriculum? Who are the guest speakers? And are we paying them? Right? Because all of the guest speakers in this series were paid. Now, some gifted the speaker fee back to the Department of DEI, but all were paid. I didn't ask these connects, though I love them and I'm connected to them, did not ask them to do this for free. That would be a violation of them and asking them to do emotional labor. So who are we paying to bring information to all of our constituents? So what's next? I've been working on a Stevens Comprehensive Institutional Training Plan. So, you know, that will be shared very soon with senior staff for their input. And then once they okay it, we'll get it out. But if your department has not communicated with me, please email. You can just do bullet points of the existing trainings that you all have now, right? Because we're just trying to document everything that's been going on so that we can take a 50,000 level view of it. And then we can decide what's missing, frequency, all that good stuff. So you can email me that. There'll be fall opportunities. Students, clubs, and organizations is another way that we can show up and do this work. The Staff Advisory Council, shout out to SAC, who always does at least a facilitation in the fall and a facilitation in the spring on campus. Faculty Senate, shout out to all of our faculty, to our alums, Board of Trustees, and members. So I challenge you, and I know Dre would too, to center Black, Indigenous people of color. We ask you to risk, put something in the game, put something online, whether that's share power, whether that's issue apologies, whatever that is. Research, collaborate. We just want you to do something. You can't get paralyzed in fear and shame and guilt. Again, learn to issue apologies and to accept an apology, right? And to show up. So let me go back so everybody can see Dre. And so very quickly, thank you for these nuggets. They'll be in the follow-up email. So this is from Dre. Quote, "You don't have to understand it to respect, affirm, and support," end quote. And thinking of non-binary or non-conforming as stepping out of what is expected of someone. on a very, very simplistic level. Don't forget about medical, social, legal, transition, that those are all different. And that we want to create spaces. This is a quote. So create spaces when the marginalized person does not have to educate. So just a few nuggets from Dre. So Stevens community in the chat, can you please show some affection, love, appreciation for Dre's time and teaching? I'm confident that you walked away either reconnecting some information, having a deeper level of understanding of some information, or maybe learning something new for the first time. And some of you quickly may have been thinking too, like why the sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, attraction, and behaviors. And we'll train and facilitate on this later, but the attractions and the behaviors is reminding ourselves that there are folks who will never adopt a label because they're living in the intersections of culture and religion, right? So behaviors, literally, you know, someone can have intimacy and intercourse with someone can have intimacy and intercourse with someone and not ever do any part of alphabet soup. You may never get them to do LGBTQIAAPPDS-2+. They may never identify in that way. And so if we don't acknowledge that, then we miss being able to witness their lives, get them necessary information or support or services. So making sure that we just know that even understanding the difference in these concepts and knowing that they are parallel spectrums doesn't mean that we can't sometimes just break stuff down to the basic level, okay? So Dre, will you please give us your final thoughts, your final Dre-ness to these communities?
Yeah, I just thank you so much for being here today and for soaking all of this in. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so honored to be here. It's always a pleasure to work with Shaashawn. So if you need anything, I put my email in the chat. Definitely hit me up. I'll do guest speaker stuff, anything that you might find fits in with your curriculum or something you need in your department. I'm more than happy to help. I also put my Instagram handle in there. So if you're on Instagram, I share little nuggets all of the time. So if you want more of that, some continued things to read on your social media feeds, you can follow me there as well. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Dre, can you repeat like the last 30 seconds because it froze?
Yeah, no, just that my Instagram handle is in there. I share little nuggets of information, and it's always cool to diversify your feed and to see more stories that are outside of your own experience. So if you want to follow me there as well, that'd be great. But also my email is in there if that is more helpful to you.
Awesome. Thank you, amazing human. We send you light in your favorite hue. And of course, safe travels from any destination, point A to point B, back to point A for you, loved ones, colleagues, and hopefully look forward to connecting again very, very soon. So the summer 2020, yes, 2020, summer 2020 inaugural summer series of Think, Speak, Do, a diversity, equity, and inclusion series at Stevens is now officially in the Herstory, Their Story, Them Story, and History books. Woo! So thank you all so much for joining, and stay connected, engaged, and do the freaking work. Peace.